is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9. English news as it should be.
Very good morning. You are watching News 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. A quick look at all the headlines we are tracking for you on this Friday. US and Iran exchange fire near Strait of Hormuz as Trump insists ceasefire remains in place despite fresh military escalation. US urges support for UN resolution demanding Iran halt Strait of Hormuz attacks as China and Russia are expected to veto measure. US senators meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing as both sides push to stabilize ties ahead of President Donald Trump's summit with Xi Jinping next week. US President Donald Trump wants the European Union to ratify a trade deal by July 4th or face sharply higher tariffs on exports to the United States. Brazilian President Lula da Silva says he does not believe US President Donald Trump will try to influence Brazil's upcoming presidential election, despite Trump's ties to the country's far right. Russia says it shot down drones headed toward Moscow on Friday, warning of possible retaliation against Ukraine despite a temporary ceasefire around Victory Day commemorations. The World Health Organization says additional Hantavirus cases could emerge after deaths linked to a cruise ship outbreak, though officials expect the spread to remain limited with precautions. India-EU free trade agreement could cover 1/3 of global trade and impact 2 billion people, says Indian commerce official. And India issues uniform GSDP calculation guidelines with 2022-23 as the new base year to improve accuracy and comparability across Indian states. US President Donald Trump said on Thursday that 3 US Navy destroyers successfully passed through the Strait of Hormuz while coming under fire from Iranian attackers. Now, posting on Truth Social, Trump claimed that American warships were not damaged during the incident, but said Iranian attackers suffered heavy losses. According to Trump, the Iranian forces involved in the attack, along with several small boats, were completely destroyed. And US President Donald Trump has said a ceasefire between the United States and Iran remains in place despite both sides exchanging fire late Thursday night, though it remains unclear who fired first.
We're negotiating with the Iranians. We have, you probably heard, we took our 3 destroyers and we rammed them through some pretty big stuff today, and we knocked the hell out of them. The destroyers weren't hurt in any way. The people weren't hurt, but they were firing at us, and we were firing back at them. And our firepower was a hell of a lot stronger than theirs, and they knocked the hell out of them. They took down a lot of small boats. You know, we call them small boats or fast boats. They're both small and they're fast, with some weaponry on the front. You know, this is what. So this is now replacing the Navy. They had a Navy 159 boats. They have none. They're all at the bottom of the sea, so they replace that with what they call the fast boat. It's a fast boat, big deal. It's fast. It's got a machine gun in front. They've been knocked down. They knocked down quite a few of them today. Yesterday, they knocked down 8. They average 8 a day. This is some group of people we're dealing with. So, you know, it's very simple. Somebody said, "What's your plan?" I said, the plan is very simple. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It cannot have a nuclear.
The United States and and Iran both appear to be moving closer to a temporary agreement to halt their ongoing conflict. Iran is currently reviewing a proposal that could stop the fighting, though major disagreements between the two sides would remain unresolved. The emerging plan is set to focus on short-term memorandum instead of a broader peace deal, as public rallies in Tehran this week showed support for the Iranian government amid the continuing tensions.
Iranians rallied in their capital this week in support of their government, amid reports Washington and Tehran are edging toward a temporary agreement to halt their war. That's according to both sources and officials on Thursday. Iran is reviewing a proposal that would stop the fighting, but leave the most contentious issues unresolved. The emerging plan centers on a short-term memorandum rather than a comprehensive peace deal. Sources said the proposed framework would unfold in 3 stages: formally ending the war, restarting the flow of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, and opening a 30-day window for negotiations on a broader agreement, and would appear significantly more limited than the broader sort of deal President Donald Trump has said Iran sought with the U.S.
I can say this, they do want to make a deal.
Trump asserted Tehran was eager to negotiate even before the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran at the end of February.
They're calling, they're saying, how do we make a deal? They want to make a deal. They're begging to make a deal.
A claim he repeated nearly every week of the war.
And it's looking very good that we're going to make a deal with Iran. They want to make a deal. They want to make a deal badly.
Nevertheless, hopes that even a partial deal could lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz have already moved markets eager for an end to the worst energy crisis in history. Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps on Thursday released video of a tanker it seized in the Gulf. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has been essentially paralyzed since February 28th, even after a truce took hold on April 7th. Talks mediated by Pakistan set out terms in a 1-page memorandum aimed at preventing a return to conflict and stabilizing shipping through the strait. The proposed document makes no mention of limits on Iran's nuclear or missile programs, its support for proxy militias in the Middle East, or its existing stockpile of near-weapons-grade uranium.
Well, the United States on Thursday urged countries to back a new UN resolution demanding that Iran stop attacks and mining activities in the Strait of Hormuz. The issue has gained added significance ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's upcoming trip to China, where the Iran conflict is expected to dominate discussions. A previous U.S.-backed resolution failed last month after Russia and China blocked it with vetoes. Now, U.S. envoy Mike Waltz warned that countries opposing the proposal would be setting a dangerous precedent, while Iran's UN ambassador dismissed the resolution as one-sided and accused Washington of lacking the moral authority to speak on maritime security.
As you are aware, the United States and the Kingdom of Bahrain has jointly tabled a deeply flawed, one-sided and politically motivated draft resolution on the situation in around the Strait of Hormuz. They claim that their actions are intended to protect freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and made some baseless allegation against my country. The fact on the ground proved otherwise. The actions of the United States stand in the stark contradiction to its stated objectives and have served only to escalate tensions and deepen instability in the region. Iran's position is clear. The only viable solution in the Strait of Hormuz is a permanent end to the war, the lifting of maritime blockade, and the restoration of normal passage. Instead, the U.S. is pushing a flawed, politically motivated draft resolution under the pretext of freedom of navigation to advance its political agenda and legitimize unlawful actions, not to resolve the crisis.
Building on the Security Council Historic Resolution 2817, the draft resolution calls for Iran to immediately cease all attacks and the threats against merchant and commercial vessels. The draft also addresses the placement of mines and illegal tolling in the strait. Allowing such action to become normalized is unacceptable. In addition, the draft addresses participation in the United Nations efforts to establish a humanitarian corridor in the strait. The draft resolution is guided by the clear principle: freedom of navigation in accordance with the international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
This should be a simple demand: the removal of mines from an international waterway, that you cannot exact illegal tolls. We have to address these violations here in the Council, and we have to ask ourselves, if a country chooses to oppose such a simple proposition, do they really want peace? As energy and food...
Well, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said that he recently met with the Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, offering the first public account of a meeting since Khamenei was reportedly severely wounded during the US-Israeli war on Iran that began on February 28th. Now, speaking at Iran's Ministry of Industry, Pezeshkian said he had the honor of meeting the leader and that the two spoke for nearly 2.5 hours.
نزدیک 2 ساعت و نیم هم خدمتشون گفتگو داشتیم. اولا باید خدمت شما بگم نگاه ایشون، نوع برخورد ایشون واقعا یه انسانی بود صمیمی و متواضعانه. از یه رهبر آدم یه چنین برخوردی به آدم بکنه، ایشون یه چنین حالتی داشت واقعا.
And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that there is no immunity for Israel's enemies a day after the Israeli military carried out a strike in Beirut's southern suburbs targeting a Hezbollah commander. Israel said the attack killed a commander in Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, marking the first strike on the area since a ceasefire was declared last month. Hezbollah has not yet commented on the strike or confirmed the commander's status.
אתמול בערב חיסלנו בלב ביירות את מפקד כוח רדואן של חיזבאללה. זה אותו מחבל בכיר שהוביל את התוכנית לכיבוש הצפון. הוא חשב שהוא יוכל להמשיך להכווין את ההתקפות על כוחותינו, על יישובינו, ממפקדת הטרור הסמויה שלו בביירות. הוא כנראה קרא בעיתונות שיש לו חסינות בביירות. טוב, אז הוא קרא, וזה כבר לא יקרה. בחודש האחרון חיסלנו יותר מ-200 מחבלי חיזבאללה, 200 מחבלים שפעלו נגד אזרחי ישראל וחיילי צה"ל.
Well, two Indian seafarers who recently returned home after a difficult 15-day journey through Iraq, Armenia and Dubai have described scenes of fear and chaos while stranded near an Iranian port for more than a month. The sailors said missiles and drones exploded around them as tensions escalated in the region. They were among thousands of seafarers from India and other countries left stranded around the Strait of Hormuz, where the ongoing conflict in Iran has severely disrupted shipping and trade, along with one of the world's busiest maritime routes.
Two seafarers arrived back in India, recounting tales of despair, having fled the Iranian port where they were stranded for over a month. TV Chiranjeevi watched drones and missiles explode as the Iranian ship he worked on was forced to anchor at the port of Khorramshahr as the Strait of Hormuz was blocked.
We would go up to the deck to see where the missiles were. The strikes were at a distance of 100 to 200 meters from our ship. Every day there were at least 10 to 20 missiles. No one could sleep at night.
He said communication lines snapped, severing his only means of contact with his mother, and leading him to apply to the ship's captain to disembark and undertake an arduous 15-day journey home that took him through Iraq, Armenia, and Dubai before landing in Mumbai. Chiranjeevi and his friend Anand Singh Chauhan say they borrowed from relatives and moneylenders at exorbitant rates to pay almost $5,000 to get jobs on international shipping routes. Now they have returned home with zero savings, risking a lifetime of spiralling debt. But Chauhan is grateful.
Sometimes we used to feel we wouldn't be able to make it back home. We felt our return was in God's and our parents' hands. We thought if we had their blessings, then we would make it.
The two were among thousands of seafarers from India and other nations who are stranded in and around the Strait of Hormuz as the war in Iran disrupts trade along one of the world's busiest ship routes. India ranks among the world's top 3 suppliers of seafarers, with a workforce of more than 300,000. The attacks on vessels have raised security concerns among seafarers who are unwilling to return to sea.
And away from the crisis in West Asia, India's proposed free trade agreement with the European Union is shaping up to be one of the world's largest trade pacts, likely covering nearly one-third of global trade and impacting around 2 billion people. The assessment was shared by Additional Secretary in the Department of Commerce, Darpan Jain, at a Federation of European Businesses in an event focused on decoding the India-EU FTA. Now, describing it as the mother of all deals, he said the pact would account for almost one-fourth of global GDP and nearly $11 trillion in trade. The disagreement is expected, in fact, the agreement, I beg your pardon, is expected to go beyond tariff cuts covering services, digital trade, telecom, finance, intellectual property rights and regulatory practices. Jain also highlighted India's rapid growth in services exports, saying they are expanding at twice the pace of goods exports over the past decade.
By this agreement, as we have heard, it's why it is mother of all deals. So if you see the numbers themselves convey 2 billion people, it touches 2 billion people, it covers 25 trillion. So if you see, the GDPs have given on the top, so 24 trillion, 25 trillion you can say. Global GDP is 100 trillion, so almost one-fourth of global GDP it covers. If we see trade, if you see trade numbers, merchandise and services together, around 6.9 is EU's export, 6.6 is import, and then services also if you cover. So almost one-third of global trade is covered by this agreement. One-third of global trade. So the global trade is around 33 trillion. Around 11 trillion is actually covered by this agreement.
And India's Statistics Ministry on Thursday released a uniform guideline for calculating gross state domestic product or GSDP using 2022-23 as the new base year. The move is aimed at creating a standardized framework to improve accuracy and make economic performance comparisons across states more consistent. The change follows the centre's decision to update the base year for national accounts to better reflect the current structure of the economy through modern data sources and improved estimation methods aligned with global standards. According to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, all states and union territories will now be required to adopt the 2022-23 base year while compiling GSDP data to ensure greater consistency and reliability in measuring regional economic growth. And the centre's latest Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme, or ECLGS 5.0, could become a major lifeline for India's MSME sector at a time of rising global uncertainty. According to an SBI research report, nearly 45% of all MSME borrowers in the country may benefit from the scheme. The scheme comes amid geopolitical tensions in West Asia, rising fuel prices and supply chain disruptions that have increased financial stress on businesses. Now, under ECLGS 5.0, eligible MSMEs can access additional credit support of up to 20% of peak working capital utilization during the fourth quarter of FY26, with a cap of 100 crore rupees. Now, the government is targeting a total additional credit flow of nearly 2.55 lakh crore rupees under the scheme. SBI research estimates the average additional credit flow per MSME account could range between 2 lakh and 2.3 lakh rupees. The report says the intervention could help protect jobs, sustain supply chains and support economic resilience during the volatile global environment. Well, the aviation sector is also expected to receive targeted relief under the package, with the 5,000 crore rupee, if fully disbursed, likely to account for 9.5% of the airline sector's total bank credit. SBI research has pointed to the success of earlier ECLGS phases rolled out during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the report, previous versions of the scheme helped prevent nearly 13.5 lakh MSME loan accounts from turning into non-performing assets and protected around 1.5 crore jobs. However, analysts have also cautioned that implementation and repayment quality will need close monitoring to prevent future stress from excessive borrowing. And on to the startup space now. Skyroot Aerospace has become the first space sector company from the private sector in India to hit a $1 billion valuation. This after securing $60 million in fresh funding from Singapore's sovereign wealth fund GIC and Silicon Valley-based Sherpalo Ventures. Now, investment management company BlackRock also took part in the funding round, taking Skyroot's total capital raised to $160 million. The company launched India's first privately developed rocket in the year 2022 and said it is now valued at $1.1 billion. Skyroot is preparing the maiden launch of Vikram-1, the country's first privately developed orbital rocket. Skyroot said the funding will allow it to increase the frequency of Vikram-1 launches, expand its manufacturing capacity and advance development of the next generation Vikram-2. Remember, founded in 2018, Hyderabad-based Skyroot was the first space startup to use ISRO launch and test facilities when the government opened the door to private companies in 2020. Its CEO and co-founder Pawan Kumar Chandana said the ability to launch rockets is critical given few countries or private companies have such capabilities. And with that, we will slip into a short break. A lot more coming up on the other side. Keep watching News 9.
New Birla Opus exterior paint gives warranty up to 16 years. Who believes that? I believe.
I do. I do.
I do.
I do.
I do. I believe it too. New Birla Opus paints gives up to 16 years warranty on walls. That's why it's the new paint for a new era.
मंडे आइएगा सब पेपर्स के साथ.
सारे पेपर्स हैं सर. How can I avoid multiple bank visits for my home loan?
Welcome back. You're watching News 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. Time now to look at other stories you're tracking for you from around the world. Well, US President Donald Trump has suffered another setback to his trade agenda after a US trade court ruled against his temporary 10% global tariffs. The US Court of International Trade said the duties were not justified under the 1974 trade law cited by the Trump administration. The ruling currently applies to 2 companies and the state of Washington, but it could pave the way for a broader legal challenge. Trump introduced the tariffs earlier this year after the Supreme Court struck down several previous duties imposed under emergency powers. The court has ordered refunds for the importers involved in the case, although the administration is expected to appeal the decision. Sector-specific tariffs on products such as steel, aluminum and automobiles remain unaffected. And US President Donald Trump on Thursday struck an upbeat tone on ties with both China and Brazil, signaling a renewed focus on trade and diplomacy. Speaking during a visit to Washington's Lincoln Memorial, Trump said he expects to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping soon, praising what he described as strong economic relations between the 2 countries.
China still going ahead?
Yeah,
which companies you
have a very good relationship with President Xi. We've had a great economic time. China's been great for us economically, but not for other presidents. But we've done very well with China. We're going to have a meeting with President Xi. It's going to be, I think, quite amazing. He's been a friend of mine. I've gotten along with him very well over the years. We have had no problem, and we've had no problem with China and Iran. You know, everybody said, "Oh, China, China." We've had no problem with China.
And later, Trump also praised Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva after closed-door talks at the White House, calling him a smart guy. The 2 leaders discussed trade, tariffs, security and critical minerals, with officials from both sides expected to hold further talks in the coming weeks.
detail your meeting with President Lula today? Was there anything agreed on between the two?
We had a great meeting with the president of Brazil. We're doing a lot of trading, and we're going to do some increased trading. We talked about tariffs. We talked about, they would like to have some tariff relief. But we had a very good meeting. He's a good man. He's a smart guy.
Meanwhile, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said he is very, very satisfied after holding talks with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House on Thursday. Lula said he does not believe Trump would interfere in Brussels elections, adding that the country's political future would be decided by Brazilian voters alone. The meeting brought together two globally influential leaders with sharply different ideologies amid efforts to ease tensions over tariffs and wider bilateral relations.
I'm leaving very, very satisfied with the meeting. I think it was an important meeting for Brazil and important for the US. I always think that the photograph is very valuable, and you could see that President Trump smiling is better than President Trump with a bad face. I honestly think that he understands the importance of the United States, but I do not believe he will have any influence on the Brazilian elections. It is the Brazilian people who vote, and I think he will act as President of the United States by allowing the Brazilian people to decide their own future, just as I will allow the American people to decide theirs.
And U.S. Senator Steve Daines met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing on Thursday in a fresh effort to stabilize strained ties between Washington and Beijing. China described the visit as highly symbolically significant, marking the first delegation of U.S. senators to visit since President Donald Trump returned to office last year. Wang Yi stressed the importance of direct dialogue and called for cooperation to ensure stable and sustainable U.S.-China relations. The meeting comes ahead of Trump's planned visit to Beijing next week for talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, a closely watched summit expected to focus on trade, technology and geopolitical tensions.
Over the past year and more, China-US relations have experienced twists and turns, yet overall stability has been maintained. One of the most important lessons from this experience has been the strategic guidance provided by Head of State diplomacy. Since President Trump assumed office, President Xi Jinping has had multiple phone calls and meetings with him, helping to calibrate the direction of bilateral relations at critical moments. We are willing to work with the US side to implement the consensus reached by the two heads of state, so that the China-US relations can truly stabilize and improve, thus benefiting both countries.
And moving on, McDonald's has missed Wall Street estimates for quarterly U.S. sales growth as budget-conscious consumers cut back on dining out. The U.S.-based fast food giant says discounted meal deals and promotional offers were not enough to offset pressure from rising fuel and grocery costs. The results now reflect growing strain on consumer spending amid broader inflation concerns in America.
McDonald's missed its U.S. sales growth target in the first quarter. The world's biggest burger chain posted US same-store sales growth of 3.9%, below Wall Street estimates. Thursday's update showed low-price meal deals and limited-time offers struggle to draw diners. Consumers have recently pulled back on spending due to higher fuel and grocery costs. CEO Chris Kempczinski said the operating environment was still challenging. That was despite McDonald's beating quarterly estimates for revenue and profit. Several US restaurant chains like Wingstop and Domino's have reported weaker quarterly sales growth. They cited a hit to customer spending from soaring gasoline prices caused by the Iran war. Wall Street analysts also argue lower-income consumers have turned more selective. It's seen buyers trade down to simpler single-item orders rather than full meals. Data from Placer.ai showed US traffic was uneven at McDonald's through the first quarter. Same-store visits fell 1.3% in January due to winter storms. Traffic bounced back just under 4% in February on pent-up demand, but slipped again in March. On a global scale, McDonald's found comparable sales rose 3.8%, slightly behind analyst forecasts, although it was an improvement on last year's numbers. The firm's total revenue of $6.52 billion beat estimates.
All right, time for a short break. A lot more coming up on the other side. Keep it with News 9.
मेरे केस बैकलॉग को क्लियर करने के लिए एक सिस्टम बनाओ।
After a blockbuster first season, where corporate giants and industry leaders ruled the court, TV9 Network presents the ultimate corporate badminton championship season 2. A battle of skill, speed and supremacy with a massive 5 lakh rupee prize pool across categories at Pulela Gopichand Badminton Academy, Gachibowli, Hyderabad from the 15th to the 17th May 2026. The court is set. Let the battles begin. Catch the action only on TV9 Network. To register, log on to www.tv9x.com.
Associate sponsor KL deemed to be university. Special partners Campa Sure, Shukar hai, Sure hai. JK Max Paints. ChatGPT helps you get answers and find inspiration. Venue partner Pulela Gopichand Badminton Academy.